Hello, movie lovers. Welcome to Does It Hold Up? Box Office Edition. This is a number show. We do a lot of talk about numbers here. So if you like numbers, you're going to like this show. If you like movies, you should probably like this show. If you don't like either one of those things, well, glad you're here anyway. Stick around. We're going to have a lot of fun with this. As always, we're going to talk about the top 10 movies at this past weekend's box office, a couple other charts, and then what we're going to do this week is we're going to break down the month of January over the last decade. So there are a lot of charts to get into. Let's go ahead and jump right into it with the top 10 movies at the domestic box office this past weekend. In first place was Den of Thieves 2 Pantera. Den of Thieves was fine. I'm surprised that it got a sequel, but here it is. It made $15 million in its opening weekend. Fantastic. In second place is Mufasa the Lion King in its fourth week with another $14.2 million. It is just under $190 million total domestically. This is a movie that opened up to only like $30 million. Everybody was like, no, this movie's an abysmal failure. It's not an abysmal failure. It's not as much of a popular movie as maybe The Lion King from 2019 is, considering that movie opened up to like 191 million, which is still, this movie's not even at that total yet, but it's not a failure. In third place is Sonic the Hedgehog 3 in its fourth week with another $11.3 million. Its total has passed 200 million because it's just under 205, which makes it the highest grossing Sonic the Hedgehog movie of the trilogy. Let me know in the comments below what you guys thought about this trilogy, because I actually think it's one of the better modern trilogies, and I want to know if I'm alone. In fourth place is Nosferatu in its third week with another just under $7 million. And oh my god, $81.9 million for this movie. Never saw it coming. It's fantastic. I'm so glad movies like this can still be made and still make money. And in fifth place in its seventh week is Moana 2 with $6.5 million. Its grand total right now is $434.9 million. Holy crap. In sixth place, literally just hanging out in sixth place, a complete unknown has been on this chart for 3 weeks now. And all 3 weeks, it has been in sixth place. It took in another, I'm going to say the full number on this one and you'll know why in just a second, $5,121,237. It's grossed just about $51 million domestically. Let's move to seventh place. It's Wicked in its eighth week, and it made $5,121,040. Less than $200 separated these two movies. That's incredible. Wicked's grand total so far is $459 million. In its third week, Baby Girl comes in eighth place with about $3.1 million. It's made an okay sum here so far of $21.7 million. In ninth place, new to the list, is a movie from India called Game Changer, making just over $2 million. And in 10th place is a movie that I was lucky enough to see early. We have a review for it on the channel right now. You know what? I'll link that at the end of this video so you can click on it and check it out. It's Pamela Anderson in The Last Showgirl. It made $1.5 million. It says new to this list, but it's actually been out for 5 weeks in very limited release. It just got wide release, or close to wide release, this past weekend, and all of that money. This is how I don't understand things sometimes. All of the money, the $1.536 million that The Last Showgirl brought in, did not actually all come from just this past weekend. It's all the money it's made over the last couple of weeks in very limited release, and then plus what it did this past weekend. I don't know how it works. It just does. But that was our top 10. Next, we're going to take a look at the comparison chart, weekend to weekend, because we can't know where we're going if we don't know where we've been. We started this about mid-year last year, and we've been keeping up with it since. We take a look at the weekend of this year, and we compare it to the same exact weekend from the previous year to see if we're doing better or worse in the theatrical market. So, we were doing 23-24, now we're doing 25-24. Let's see if 25's doing any better. It is the second weekend of the year, And last year, on this very same weekend, in 2024, Mean Girls was the #1 movie in theaters, and it led all movies to a grand total of $101.2 million. Unfortunately, this year was much less. It was only $78 million, led by Den of Thieves 2. Not surprising, didn't have a big release. I mean, Mean Girls is a much bigger movie than Den of Thieves 2, so it's not surprising that the numbers are very offset here. It's about a $6 million difference. 2024 didn't have a very good start to the year, so I'm a little concerned already. I know we're only 2 weeks in, there's still 50 weeks to go, but to not be beating one of the weakest Januaries in history is a little concerning, but we'll see how it goes moving forward, considering the fact that there's not a lot of good big movies coming out anytime soon. Let's go ahead and move to the next chart, and that is the top 10 movies of 2025. You're going to see some movies on this chart that were released in 2024, but the way my chart works, I know a lot of other box office people also do similar charts like this, and they do it just on movies that released this year. I do it based on if you've made money in 2025, who were the top 10 grossers, basically. So even if you came out in 2024, I figure out what you made just in 2025 since January 1st, and that's how this list comes out. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. In first place is Mufasa the Lion King with $61.6 million made in just 2025. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is in second place with $53.3 million. Nosferatu moves up one spot from last week because it's made $33.8 million here in 2025. Moana 2 drops one place with that $30.8 million. Wicked stays in fifth with $26 million. A Complete Unknown stays in sixth. A Complete Unknown just really likes the sixth spot on every single chart because it's made $22.5 million. Den of Thieves 2 jumps into this chart with the $15 million into seventh place. In eighth place is Baby Girl with $12.5 million, Gladiator 2 in ninth with $6.5 million, and Homestead in 10th with $5.2 million. Those all dropped one spot, and one movie has dropped off the list this early, and that's The Fire Inside. Okay, so that's the end of the box office portion where we talked about all the modern stuff, the things that are currently happening in theaters. Next, we are going to do a little retrospective on the month of January, the first month of every single year. Is it good for studios? Is it good for movies? Is it good for theaters? We're going to kind of sort of take a look at that in just a little bit of a fun kind of way with charts, because charts are awesome. Numbers are awesome. So the first chart we're going to look at is how much was the total domestic box office in the month of January for every year since 2015. I know there's a lot of stuff going on in this chart, and that's okay. We're going to break it down right now. All the way back in 2015, every single movie that made money in January totaled a box office gross of $997.4 million. That is insane. And then it only gets better in 2016 because that year all the movies made $1,028 million. Over $1 billion in just the first month of the year. It helps that in 2016 it was almost $12 billion for the entire year, so it makes sense, about $1 billion per month. In 2017 it dropped significantly, down to $950 million. In 2018 it stayed right about there. It jumped up $3 million to $954 million. In 2019, which is just kind of crazy, and I don't know what happened here in January, but it only made $804 million. That is a huge drop, $150 million drop from the previous year, and yet 2019 was a very big year for movies. In fact, it's one of the highest grossing, if not the highest grossing year of the 2000s and 2010s. So surprising to see that January wasn't very good. Did jump up in 2020 to almost $900 million, and I know you're probably sitting there thinking, oh wait, that was the pandemic year. How did it make so much money? Things didn't close down until March of that year, and in January, everything was kind of just going as normal, and there were a couple good-ish movies that came out that month, so people were headed into the theaters. But then 2021 hit, and 2021, in all of January of that year, $58.7 million is how much money every single movie that was in theaters made. That's sad. That's so sad. But it happens. That's when theaters were actually closed, or not all of them. Some of them were starting to come back, but there were a lot of rules and regulations and limits to how things could work, so not a lot of people were going back. In 2022, we were still recovering. January only brought in $388 million. In 2023, we were almost back to normal. I think people were still hesitant and not a lot of good movies were coming out at the time, so it only made $585 million. In 2024, a decrease again for just under $500 million, which is just, that's crazy. 2024 didn't have a bunch of banger movies, but some of these other years didn't, and they still made more money. And then here in 2025, only 12 days in when this chart was being made, it's about $285 million. So halfway through the month, a little under halfway through the month, we are already more than halfway to the 2024 total and just about halfway to the 2023 total. So I would imagine by the end of January 2025, we're going to have made more money this month, this year, than the last 2 years. But there's only one way to find out, and that's wait until the end of the month. The next chart we're going to look at is the daily average of how much movies were bringing in the month of January over these same years. In 2015, the daily average was about $32 million. It goes up slightly in 2016 to $33 million, drops again in 2017 to $30.6 million, then goes up ever so slightly in 2018 to $30.8 million, before cratering again in 2019 to $25.9 million, up a little bit in 2020 to that $28.9 million, and then, like we just talked about, 2021 was a terrible year for movie going until the end of the year, which we'll get to shortly, but it was just under $2 million per movie in theaters in the month of January. That's crazy. 2022 went up to $12.5 million. 2023 was $18.8 million. 2024 drops a little bit to $16 million. But as you can see right now in 2025, it is all the way up to $23.7 million. That's a pretty good daily average. That is like right in the middle, basically, of all of these numbers. So that might be a good sign that the box office might be relatively healthy in the year 2025. Okay, and then just to take this a little step farther, because I didn't want to just settle on just those two charts, that's kind of like, great. I wanted to go through every month, and I'm going to show you what was the #1 movie at the box office through every weekend of January of every year. That's a lot of ofs, but it all makes sense once we get there. The one criteria here, though, is the weekend had to be encompassed by all days in January. So if January 1st landed on a Saturday, that weekend wouldn't count because that Friday would have been to December. Or if at the end of it, the weekend was like January 31st falls on a Saturday, well, then it wouldn't count because that Sunday, which is part of that weekend, would have been a February date. So every single movie you see here is only weekends where every single day landed in January. We're going to go back to 2015 and we're going to talk about that one first. In January 2015, these were the four #1 movies over the 4 weekends that were totally encompassed within January. And in the very first weekend, it was The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, which was in its 3rd weekend, and it was at $21.7 million. That's how much it brought in its 3rd week. And it would go on to gross a total of $255 million. In the 2nd weekend that year, Taken 3 was new to the theaters and had a pretty good opening of $39.2 million, but it would kind of fail from there. Its grand total would be $89.2 million. American Sniper, you can see a little asterisk there. It does say its 4th week. It made $89.2 million, but That's a little bit misleading because this was the weekend it went wide. It was only in about 5 or 6 theaters prior to this, so it makes a lot of sense on why a fourth week release made that much money. The movie would go on to make a very impressive total, $350 million. And in the fourth weekend in that January was also American Sniper, where it made $64 million. January 2016 had 5 weekends, not your typical 4. And the first 2 weekends were taken over by Star Wars The Force Awakens, with $90 million in its third week and $42 million in its fourth week. That movie would go on to gross over $900 million, one of the highest grossing movies of all time. Third weekend belonged to Ride Along 2, fourth weekend The Revenant, and the fifth weekend Kung Fu Panda 3. You can see 2 new movies are on this list, but other than that, it was kind of dominated by movies that had been in theaters for a long time. January 2017, only 2 movies hit the #1 spot in the entire month of January. That was Hidden Figures in its third and fourth week for the first 2 weekends. That movie actually had a really good total, almost $170 million for Hidden Figures. The movie's incredible. If you've never seen it, go watch it. It's fantastic. And then in the third and fourth weekend of January of this year, you had New, and then in its second week, the movie Split, which went on to be a surprise hit with $138 million. Let's go ahead and move into 2018. This is a crazy looking chart. First 3 weeks are taken over by the same exact movie, Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle, in its third, fourth, and fifth week, making respectively $37, $28, and $19 million. It would go on to do a domestic gross of $404.5 million. I'm pretty sure Dwayne Johnson is sitting here thinking, how do I get back to that after the abysmal failure of Red One? And in the fourth weekend of that year, Maze Runner: The Death Cure, a movie that nobody remembers actually coming out, opened new that weekend, brought in $24 million, but would kind of end there because it only made $58 million total. 2019, first weekend was Aquaman in its third week with $31 million, a very good total for that movie, $335 million. Second weekend was The Upside. I've seen this movie. I thought it was pretty good. I don't think it was great by any means. It shocked me to see that it opened up new and #1. It didn't surprise me it opened up new. That doesn't make any sense. It surprised me that it opened up #1 the weekend that it came out with $20.3 million and then went and crossed the $100 million mark. Good for you, The Upside. And the third and fourth weekends were dominated by Glass when it was new and in its second weekend. January 2020. The first weekend was dominated by Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker, maybe the most divisive Star Wars movie of all time. It was in its third week, making $34 million, and would impressively go on to gross $515 million domestically. In its second weekend and third week at the theater, 1917 made $37 million. This is when it was getting nominated for Academy Awards, and everybody was like, gotta go check this movie out, because then it brought in an impressive haul of $160 million. Bad Boys for Life on the third and fourth weekend of January 2020 was new, and in its second weekend dominating the box office, going on to make a total gross of $204 million. 2021, here we go. 5 weekends this year, and I bet every single theater out there was like, wish this was only a 4-week, let's get rid of some of this. Wonder Woman 84, yes. That was a movie. It came out. People saw it, kind of. In its second and third week, made $5.5 million, then only $3 million, and would only go on to gross $46.8, one of the weakest DC movies of all time. In the third and fourth weekend of that year was The Marksman with $3 million, then $2 million, and then new in the fifth weekend was The Little Things. This is a year that I'm pretty sure everybody wants to forget for movies, so let's go ahead and just move on. 2022, this one's fun. We're starting to see a pattern here, hopefully you guys are noticing it as well. In the first weekend of January 2022, Spider-Man: No Way Home was in its fourth week of release, and it brought in $32.6 million to take the #1 spot, and would go on to gross $814 million domestically. That's insane. The only time it wasn't the #1 movie in January 2022 was in the second weekend when a new Scream hit theaters and made $30 million. It would go on to gross $81, which was pretty impressive for a franchise that a lot of people thought was dead at that point. January 2023. There's not much to say here. It was dominated by Avatar: The Way of Water in its 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th week. You can see all the numbers there. It went from 45 to 32 to 20 to 15 million. I'm surprised that that number's a little low. I think that total of 684 million, when you look at the fact it was the #1 movie for 4 weeks straight in its 4th through 7th week, you would expect that number to be higher than 684, but here we are. And last year, January 2024, we started the year with Wonka being the #1 movie in its 4th week with 14 million. It would go on to make an incredible 218 million for not a very good movie. And then Mean Girls dominated the rest of January in its 1st week, 2nd week, and 3rd week of release with 28, 11, and $7 million, but it would fall very short of the original with only 72.4. And then the last year, this year, January 2025, the first weekend was Mufasa in its 3rd week with 23 million, and in the 2nd weekend, we just talked about it, was Den of Thieves 2 with that 15 million. So as we get later, so over a decade ago, movies were kind of sharing the #1 spot here in January. As we got closer to 2025, you noticed that just a few movies would start to dominate January. So it was a little change in how things were going with theaters and studios in general. And you may have also noticed that usually the first week of January is not dominated by a new movie of any kind. It is a movie that is usually in its 3rd or 4th weekend of release. Just something that I noticed while doing this. That's it for this week's show. We'll be back again later this week with an Oscar redux going to the year 2015. We got some movie reviews and other things coming up, so make sure you like, share, subscribe so you never miss a video from us, and let us know in the comments below what you thought about all of these numbers. Until I see you again, remember to be good to yourself, kind to others, and keep watching movies.